Hey guys, welcome back for another video. With the release of Beyblade xone coming up, this will mark the first time that we've had a Beyblade game localized in like over 10 years. It's going to be coming out on Steam as well as Switch, so I figured it would be a good time to take a look at some of the first Beyblade games that ever got released. These are games that came out on the Game Boy Color or the Game Boy Advance, and they're pretty interesting. I think they're fairly good games. Unfortunately, there aren't English patches for most of these, but if you want to take a try at them, they're pretty easy to figure out. With all of that being said, let's take a look at the first Beyblade game ever released. This is Jisadai Battle Beigoma Beyblade. This is the first piece of Beyblade media. It was released in 1999 on the Game Boy Color and takes a lot of inspiration from Pokemon, a lot of other franchises that were out at the time like Yu-Gi-Oh! Shoji Mizuno was responsible for the character designs for Takao, Kai, and Jin, which would later be adopted into the manga and later the anime. The game takes a lot of inspiration from the early Pokemon games, coming out only a few years after Pokemon Red, and the same year as Pokemon Silver and Gold. The main character, Takao, is said to have been designed based off of the character Red. You play as Takao, who has recently participated in his elementary school tournament and receives his amateur blading license, and your goal is to increase your rank until you are able to participate in the final World Championship battle. The game is an extremely ambitious Game Boy Color game, offering over 190 bit beasts, which are basically the game's iteration of Pokemon. The game also has different part customization for your Beyblade that will basically increase or decrease certain stats for your Beyblade. There's also bit beast evolutions that function similarly to Pokemon, where when you hit a certain level, some of them will evolve, some of them are item dependent and trade dependent. In order to obtain new bit beasts, one of the ways that you can do it is playground rules, by challenging different NPCs and random encounters and then betting one of your Beyblades against theirs, and if you win, you get to take their Beyblade. This does leave you with the potential to soft lock your game if you get too greedy, so be careful. Kai and Jin, the other characters that are introduced into the manga and the anime after this game's release, work as antagonistic characters, with Kai being sort of the lead of a Team Rocket-esque type group. While the main plotline is pretty linear, there's a ton of side quests chalked into the game that get pretty deep. The combat system forgoes sort of the turn-based system of the early Pokemon games and instead goes for an action RPG element where you have full control over your Beyblade during the battles. And despite being the first Beyblade game and the first piece of Beyblade media ever released, I feel like the developers put a lot of time into the game, really trying to make it as polished a Game Boy game as possible. There's definitely some glitches and some wonky things that happen in the game. However, I feel like they did the best that they could given the circumstances and the limitation of the hardware, and I highly recommend checking this game out. The second and third Game Boy Color games were both developed by Hudson and released in the subsequent years, with the second game being released in 2000 and the third game being released in 2001. The second and third game both essentially use the same engine and forego the sort of live action RPG elements of the first game, turn it into basically an RPG simulator wherein you don't really have any control over the Beyblades or any moves between rounds. Basically, the only control you are given is your combo, your bit, and then your launch strength. And then once you launch the Beyblade, it kind of just does its thing in the match. Really, you're just spectating the battle, which I guess you could argue is pretty realistic when it comes to Beyblade, but it's not that fun. Both the second and third game are pretty mediocre in my opinion. They do introduce some interesting things. They sort of keep the evolution aspect of the first game. You start off with a kid's version of a bit beast, so Kid Dragoon, Kid Dronzer, Kid Drasil, and then it evolves as you progress through the game. But the bit list is substantially shorter than the first game, with the list only being about 60 or so bit beasts, where the first game was like over 190. The plot for the second game also goes a more standardized route, with just basically a tournament that you participate in, with characters from the manga being more solidified in this game, like Takao, Kai, Max, and Ray. However, a lot of the plot wasn't set up through the manga yet. It hadn't been out that long, so the main focus for this game was a tournament arc, which later got adopted more into the manga from this game. The third game is largely the same. Like I said, it's built off of the same engine. However, it does have some differences. This game focuses on the storyline of Daichi, who had yet to be introduced in the manga, and in this game is actually related to Takao, or Tyson, the main character from Plastic Gen. It does bring a return to some of the more traditional standard RPG elements, like the overworld exploration. However, you still have the same sort of simulation battle experience with this game. Additionally, instead of the bit option, you're stuck with the 1 bit for Daichi. However, it's not the modernized version of Strata Dragoon because it hadn't been created yet, and Daichi's initial bit beast design had not been solidified yet either. I think the games try to do some interesting things given the limitations of the hardware, and if you're more a fan of the idea of a sort of simulation Beyblade game, you might enjoy these. However, the sort of archaic look of the sprites on the Game Boy Color just don't make this game very appealing to play in modern days. The Game Boy Advance era of Beyblade games in terms of the Japanese side switches things up quite a bit. There was 4 games in total, with the first one basically being a sort of linear story progression of the anime, which hadn't been done yet before. Everything previously had either been the manga or had not been established yet. So the first game follows sort of the first season, and then the follow-up game follows the Bakuten Shoot 2002 season, which is the second season of the anime, or V-Force as we know it in America. And then the third and fourth game are pairings, where you play as sort of a team. So you play as either Daichi or Takao in their respective versions, and you recruit 3 players into your team and basically fight through a tournament arc. These games abandon the sort of simulation aspect of the second and third Game Boy Color games and instead return to a traditional turn-based RPG sort of element. Between each attacks, you will have the option to make different moves, whether it's attacking or defending or using special moves. If you're a fan of sort of the traditional RPG experience, these games are pretty good. The sprite work looks amazing, the music's pretty good, the customization is great, and the ability to create your own teams based around your favorite characters is pretty cool. Say you want Tyson, Tala, Ray, and Kai on a team, you can make that happen, which is pretty cool. The game has a lot of replayability, and the battle system I think is pretty interesting. There are a ton of other Beyblade games that have been released over the years on home console like PlayStation and GameCube, as well as other handhelds like the 3DS and the PSP. I'm curious if you guys have played any Beyblade games. What is your favorite? Let me know down in the comments. As always, hit the like for the algorithm, subscribe if you haven't already for future Beyblade content, and I will see you guys in the next one.